I never imagined that a letter about my dock would lead to me discovering I own the most valuable piece of property in Pinecrest, Georgia. But here we are. The letter arrived on a Tuesday morning in late March, stuffed into my mailbox alongside the usual junk mail and bills. The return address read Pinecrest Hills HOA in professional lettering, and I remember feeling that familiar knot in my stomach that always came with official correspondence. I had moved to this lakeside community 3 years ago after my divorce, buying the old Morrison property specifically because it came with a private dock extending into Lake Whitmore. The piece I found sitting on that dock with a beer and a fishing rod had been worth every penny of the asking price. I tore open the envelope and read the letter twice, convinced I was misunderstanding something. According to HOA President Brenda Hutchinson, my dock was in violation of community standards and represented a safety hazard. I was being given 30 days to either bring it up to code at an estimated cost of $45,000 or sell it to the HOA for a nominal fee of $500. $500 for a dock that had cost the previous owner $12,000 to build just 8 years ago. I sat down at my kitchen table, reading the letter a third time. My name is Daniel Lawson, and I am a generally calm person. I spent 20 years working as a civil engineer before taking early retirement, and I pride myself on logical thinking and measured responses. But this letter had my blood pressure rising with each word. The dock was perfectly maintained, structurally sound, and I had the inspection reports to prove it. I had inherited all the property documents from the Morrison estate, and there had never been any mention of dock regulations or HOA jurisdiction over private water access. I grabbed my phone and dialed the number listed on the letterhead. A cheerful voice answered after 2 rings. Pinecrest Hills HOA, this is Margaret speaking. How may I help you? This is Daniel Lawson on Lakeview Drive. I just received a letter about my dock, and I need to speak with Brenda Hutchinson immediately. Oh, Mr. Lawson, yes, Mrs. Hutchinson mentioned you might be calling. She is available tomorrow at 10 in the morning. Would that work for your schedule? I wanted to argue to demand an immediate explanation, but I forced myself to stay calm. Fine, 10 o'clock tomorrow at the HOA office. Yes, sir, we are located in the community center building. Do you know where that is? I assured her I did and hung up. The rest of that day was a wash. I could not focus on anything except that ridiculous letter. I pulled out all my property documents, spreading them across my dining room table. The deed, the survey maps, the title insurance, the disclosure statements. Everything showed clearly that my property extended to the waterline and included full rights to the dock. There was no easement, no restriction, nothing that would give the HOA any claim to it. That evening, I walked down to the dock and sat in my usual spot. Lake Whitmore stretched out before me, maybe 300 acres of calm water surrounded by pine forests and the scattered homes of our community. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. This was my sanctuary, the place I came to think and decompress. The idea of some HOA bureaucrat trying to take it away from me was infuriating. My neighbor, Tom Richardson, waved from his yard. Tom was in his 60s, retired from the Postal Service, and had lived in Pinecrest Hills for over 15 years. I waved back and he wandered over. Got the letter, huh? Tom said, settling onto the edge of my dock. You too? Nah, my place is too far from the water. But Brenda has been making noise about docks and water access for months now. Started after the Kimballs built that massive boathouse last summer. She said it was an eyesore and started pushing for new regulations. My dock has been here for 8 years. It was here when she became HOA president. Tom shrugged. Brenda does not care much about logic. She cares about control, and she has some bee in her bonnet about privatizing the lake access. I heard her talking at the last HOA meeting about how individual docks decrease property values and create liability issues. The lake is private property. Multiple owners have deeded access. She cannot just decide to take over everyone's docks. You would think so, Tom said. But Brenda has a way of getting what she wants. She is buddy-buddy with half the board members and they rubber stamp whatever she proposes. My advice: get yourself a good lawyer before that meeting tomorrow. I thanked Tom for the warning and spent the rest of the evening researching property lawyers in the area. By the time I went to bed, I had an appointment scheduled with Patricia Chen at Chen and Associates for tomorrow afternoon, right after my HOA meeting. I arrived at the community center at 9:45 the next morning, determined to be early and in control of my emotions. The building was a modern structure with lots of glass and cedar siding, built 5 years ago with a special assessment that had cost every homeowner in Pinecrest Hills $3,000. The interior was tastefully decorated with leather furniture and landscape paintings of local scenery. Margaret, the receptionist, was a pleasant woman in her 50s who directed me to a conference room down the hall. Brenda Hutchinson was already there, sitting at the head of a long table with a stack of folders in front of her. She stood as I entered, extending her hand with a smile that did not reach her eyes. Brenda was exactly what you would expect from an HOA president on a power trip. She appeared to be in her late 40s, with blonde hair styled in that specific suburban mom cut that probably required twice-weekly salon visits. She wore a cream-colored pantsuit and enough jewelry to make it clear she considered herself important. "Mr. Lawson, thank you so much for coming in," she said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "Please have a seat. Can Margaret get you some coffee or water?" "I am fine," I said, sitting down across from her. "Let us talk about this letter. You are claiming my dock is a violation and demanding I either spend $45,000 or sell it to the HOA for $500. I would like to know what regulation I am violating and under what authority you are making this demand." Brenda's smile tightened just a fraction. She opened one of her folders and slid a document across the table. The Pinecrest Hills master plan was updated 6 months ago. All private docks must meet specific structural, aesthetic, and safety standards. Your dock fails on multiple counts. It is too wide, it extends too far into the lake, and the wood is untreated pine rather than the required composite materials. I picked up the document and scanned it. Sure enough, there were detailed specifications for docks, including materials, dimensions, and setback requirements. My dock violated several of them, but something was wrong here. "I never received notice of these changes," I said. "And even if I had, these rules cannot be applied retroactively to existing structures. My dock predates these regulations by 8 years. All homeowners were notified by mail and email," Brenda said. "And the regulations specifically state that existing non-compliant structures must be brought into compliance within 1 year of the rule adoption. That deadline was last month. I received no such notice. And I am looking at this master plan, and I do not see any mention of a grace period or grandfathering clause. This looks like you are trying to force existing dock owners to either spend a fortune on upgrades or surrender their property." Brenda's expression hardened. "Mr. Lawson, I understand you are upset, but these rules were properly adopted by the board after extensive community input. Your dock is not the only one affected. Several homeowners have already complied with the new standards, or sold their docks to the HOA for pennies on the dollar. Some homeowners have chosen that option, yes. The HOA is prepared to offer fair market value for non-compliant structures. $500 is not fair market value for a $12,000 dock. Fair market value for a structure that is in violation of community standards and would cost $45,000 to bring into compliance, Brenda corrected. We had an independent appraiser assess the dock. $500 is generous, considering the alternative is paying for demolition yourself. I took a deep breath, fighting to keep my temper in check. I need time to review this with my attorney. I am not agreeing to anything today. Of course, Brenda said smoothly. You have 30 days from the date of the letter. After that, the HOA will be forced to pursue legal action to compel compliance. I would hate for it to come to that, Mr. Lawson. Legal fees can be so expensive. The threat was barely veiled. I stood up, taking the master plan document with me. I will be in touch. Oh, Mr. Lawson, one more thing, Brenda said as I reached the door. The HOA has also filed a lien against your property for unpaid assessments related to the Lake Maintenance Fund. That is another $1,500. I am sure it is just an oversight on your part. I have never received any bills for a lake maintenance fund. They were included in your annual HOA assessment. Perhaps you overlooked them. Margaret can provide you with copies of all the invoices. I left the community center feeling like I had just been mugged. On my way out, Margaret handed me a manila envelope containing what she said were copies of all the relevant documents. I thanked her and drove straight to my lawyer's office, even though my appointment was not for another 3 hours. Patricia Chen was a sharp woman in her 30s who specialized in property law and HOA disputes. Her office was in downtown Pinecrest, above a coffee shop that filled the stairwell with the smell of fresh roasted beans. She agreed to see me early when I explained the situation, and I spent the next 2 hours laying out everything for her while she took notes and reviewed my documents. This is problematic, Patricia said finally, leaning back in her chair. The HOA did adopt these regulations legally, and they did send out notices. I can see the certified mail receipts here. But you are right that there should have been a grandfathering provision for existing structures. The fact that there is not one suggests this was deliberately designed to force dock owners into a corner. Can they do that, legally? It is a gray area. HOAs have broad authority to create and enforce community standards, but those standards have to be reasonable and applied fairly. The bigger issue is this Lake Maintenance Fund assessment. Did you know Lake Whitmore is fed by an underground spring system? I knew it was spring-fed, yes. That is why the water is so clear. Patricia pulled out a survey map of the area, spreading it across her desk. According to the county records, Lake Whitmore itself is not HOA common property. It is actually divided among the waterfront property owners as tenants in common. Each waterfront lot includes a proportional ownership stake in the lake bed and water rights. So the HOA does not own the lake. No, they have no more claim to it than any other property owner, which means they have no authority to charge a lake maintenance fee, and they certainly have no authority to regulate private docks beyond normal community aesthetic standards. I felt a surge of vindication. So Brenda is running a scam. I would not use that word in court, but yes, this appears to be a case of the HOA exceeding its authority. However, proving that and fighting them on it will take time and money. These cases can drag on for years. I do not have years. She gave me 30 days. Then we need to find leverage, Patricia said. She studied the survey map again, her finger tracing the outline of Lake Whitmore and the property lines around it. Do you have the original deed for your property? The one from when the Morrison family first purchased the land? I have everything the title company gave me. Let me look. I pulled out my folder and started sorting through documents. The deed I had received at closing was straightforward, but there were older documents attached, including something labeled Historical Chain of Title. I handed it to Patricia. She read through it carefully, her eyes widening slightly. "Daniel, do you know what this says?" "It is the original land grant from when the property was first developed. What about it?" "Lake Whitmore was man-made. It was created in 1952 by damming Morrison Creek, which runs through what is now your property. According to this, your land includes the original creek bed and all water rights associated with it. You do not just own a share of the lake, you own the water source that feeds it." I stared at her. "What does that mean exactly?" "It means that Morrison Creek flows underground through your property before it emerges and feeds into Lake Whitmore. The original Morrison family retained all water rights when they sold off surrounding parcels. Those rights passed through the chain of title to you. If I am reading this correctly, you have the legal authority to control or even divert that water source. You are saying I could cut off the lake's water supply?" "In theory, yes. Though I would not recommend actually doing it, but this gives us tremendous leverage. If the HOA wants to push you around about your dock, we can push back by pointing out that you control the lake's primary water source." I sat back, my mind racing. Brenda said the HOA is collecting fees for lake maintenance. If they do not own the lake, where is that money going? "Excellent question. I think we need to do some more digging. Can you get me copies of the HOA's financial records? As a homeowner, you are entitled to review them." I left Patricia's office with a long list of documents to request, and a growing sense that this situation was much bigger than my dock. I drove home, drafted a formal letter requesting all HOA financial records, meeting minutes and documentation of the Lake Maintenance Fund, and hand-delivered it to Margaret at the community center. She accepted it with a nervous smile, saying she would pass it along to Brenda. That evening I received a phone call from an unknown number. When I answered, a man's voice said, "Mr. Lawson, this is Richard Pemberton. I am the HOA's attorney. I understand you are disputing the dock compliance issue. I wanted to reach out and see if we could settle this matter amicably." "I am open to reasonable discussion," I said carefully. "But I am not selling my dock for $500, and I am not spending $45,000 on unnecessary upgrades." "I understand your frustration," Richard said, his tone conciliatory. "Perhaps we can work out a payment plan for the upgrades, or revise the assessment to something more manageable. The HOA's primary concern is community standards and safety. I am sure we can find a solution that works for everyone." "I have some concerns about the HOA's authority over the lake," I said. "My attorney has raised questions about the legal basis for the lake maintenance fees and dock regulations." There was a pause. "What kind of questions?" "Questions about whether the HOA actually has jurisdiction over Lake Whitmore and the individual docks. My understanding is that the lake is owned by the waterfront property owners, not the HOA as a whole." Another pause, longer this time. "Mr. Lawson, I think it would be better if we met in person to discuss this. Are you available tomorrow?" We scheduled a meeting for the following afternoon at Richard's office. After I hung up, I called Patricia and told her about the conversation. "They are worried," she said with satisfaction. "That is good. It means they know their legal position is weak. I will come with you to the meeting. Do not agree to anything without running it by me first." The next day, Patricia and I arrived at Richard Pemberton's law office, a small firm in a converted Victorian house on Main Street. Richard was a man in his 60s with silver hair and an expensive suit. He greeted us warmly and ushered us into a conference room where Brenda Hutchinson was already waiting. Brenda's expression when she saw Patricia was priceless. The fake smile slipped for just a moment, revealing genuine anger underneath, before she recovered her composure. "Thank you both for coming," Richard said, taking his seat. "I think we can resolve this matter quickly and fairly. Mrs. Hutchinson has authorized me to offer Mr. Lawson an increased settlement for his dock. We are prepared to offer $5,000, plus waiving the lake maintenance fees that are currently in dispute." "No," I said simply. "Mr. Lawson, please be reasonable. That is 10 times our original offer. My dock is worth at least $12,000. It is in perfect condition, and I have no intention of selling it. Furthermore, my attorney has informed me that the HOA has no legal authority to regulate private docks or charge lake maintenance fees. Lake Whitmore is owned by the waterfront property owners, not the HOA." Brenda leaned forward. "Mr. Lawson, you are being deliberately obstinate. The HOA has a responsibility to maintain community standards. Your dock is an eyesore and a liability." "My dock meets all county building codes and has passed inspection every year since it was built. Your personal opinion of its appearance is irrelevant." "This is not personal," Brenda snapped. "This is about protecting property values for all residents." "No," Patricia interjected smoothly. "This is about you exceeding your authority and attempting to seize private property under false pretenses. Lake Whitmore is not HOA common property. Each waterfront owner has a proportional interest in the lake bed and water rights. The HOA has no more authority over those docks than it does over someone's backyard shed." Richard cleared his throat. "That is a matter of legal interpretation. The HOA's position is that the master plan governs all visible structures and common areas." "The lake is not a common area," Patricia said. She pulled out a document and slid it across the table. "This is the subdivision plat from 1952 when Pinecrest Hills was first developed. It clearly shows Lake Whitmore divided among the waterfront parcels. There is no provision for HOA ownership or control." Richard studied the document, his expression troubled. Brenda tried to grab it, but he held it away from her. "Where did you get this?" Brenda demanded. "County records," Patricia said. "Public information." "While I was there, I also pulled the HOA's Articles of Incorporation and bylaws. There is no mention of lake maintenance or dock regulation in any of the founding documents. These new rules you have adopted are ultra vires, beyond your legal authority." "This is ridiculous," Brenda said, her voice rising. "The board voted on these regulations. We followed proper procedure." "You followed proper procedure to adopt rules you had no authority to create," Patricia said. "And that brings me to my next question. You have been collecting lake maintenance fees from homeowners for over 2 years. That is approximately $150,000, based on the number of homes in the community and the annual assessment amounts. Where is that money?" Richard looked at Brenda. "Mrs. Hutchinson." "It is in the lake maintenance fund, obviously," Brenda said. "We have used it for water quality testing, aquatic weed removal, and dock repairs." "Dock repairs on docks the HOA does not own," Patricia said. "And I am betting those repairs were done on docks that owners had already sold to the HOA for pennies on the dollar. How many docks has the HOA acquired in the last 2 years, Mrs. Hutchinson?" Brenda's face flushed red. "That is confidential HOA business." "Actually, it is not. Mr. Lawson is entitled to review all HOA financial records. I assume you received his formal request yesterday." "I received some letter," Brenda said dismissively. "I will respond when I have time." "You have 10 days under Georgia law," Patricia said. But since we are all here, perhaps you could just tell us, how many docks has the HOA acquired? Brenda stood up abruptly. I do not have to sit here and be interrogated. This meeting is over. Sit down, Brenda, Richard said quietly. You are making this worse. Excuse me. Sit down. If what Miss Chen is saying is true, the HOA has a serious problem. I need to understand the scope of it. Brenda sat down slowly, her jaw clenched. Richard turned to Patricia. What exactly are you alleging? I am not alleging anything yet. I am asking questions. But it appears that the HOA has been systematically targeting dock owners, creating onerous regulations that existing docks cannot meet, and then forcing owners to either sell their docks for far below market value or pay exorbitant sums for upgrades. The HOA then collects maintenance fees for the lake, despite having no legal authority over it, and uses that money to maintain the docks it has acquired through coercion. If I am right, this is fraud on a fairly significant scale. Richard closed his eyes briefly. How many docks, Brenda? 7, she said tightly. 7 homeowners chose to sell their docks to the HOA rather than pay for upgrades. It was their choice. Their choice between being extorted and being bankrupted, I said. You gave them the same ultimatum you gave me. Spend $45,000 or take $500 and walk away. And what did you do with those docks? Patricia asked. Did you demolish them? Upgrade them? Brenda did not answer. You are renting them out, I said, the pieces suddenly clicking together. That is why you want to control all the docks. You are turning them into a profit center. You acquire them for nothing, do minimal maintenance with the fees you collect from everyone else, and then rent them out to non-waterfront homeowners. That is not illegal, Brenda said. The HOA is entitled to generate revenue. It is illegal when you do not own the property you are renting out, Patricia said. Those docks are built on lake bed that belongs to the original property owners. When you coerced those homeowners into surrendering their docks, you did not acquire any underlying property rights. You are essentially renting out structures that are built on someone else's land without permission. Richard put his head in his hands. Please tell me you consulted with legal counsel before implementing this plan. We did not need to, Brenda said defensively. The board approved everything. This was all done properly. The board is not a substitute for a lawyer, Richard said, and I certainly never advised you on any of this. How much revenue has the HOA generated from dock rentals? About $30,000 over the past 2 years, Brenda admitted. But that money has gone right back into lake improvements. We are not pocketing it. That is not the point, Richard said. He turned to Patricia. What is your client looking for? Right now, we want the HOA to withdraw all claims against Mr. Lawson's dock, rescind the lake maintenance fees, and stop all dock rental operations. Longer term, we want the HOA to make restitution to the homeowners you defrauded. We did not defraud anyone, Brenda protested. You created regulations you had no authority to create, forced homeowners to surrender valuable property based on those false regulations, and then profited from that property, Patricia said. In Georgia, that is fraud and possibly theft by deception. We could go to the district attorney with this. Now wait a minute, Richard said, holding up his hands. Let us not be hasty. I am sure we can work something out. Mrs. Hutchinson, I need to speak with you privately. Patricia and I stepped outside while Richard and Brenda conferred. We waited in his reception area for nearly 20 minutes before being called back in. Brenda looked like she had been crying, her makeup slightly smudged. The HOA is prepared to offer a settlement, Richard said wearily. We will withdraw all claims against your dock, refund any lake maintenance fees you have paid, and pay you $10,000 for your time and trouble. In exchange, You sign a non-disclosure agreement and release the HOA from any further claims. No NDA, Patricia said immediately. The other homeowners who were defrauded deserve to know what happened. 20,000 with the NDA, Richard countered. That is as high as we can go without board approval. I looked at Patricia. She shook her head slightly. This is not just about my client, she said. This is about 7 other families who were cheated out of their property. If you want to settle, you need to make them whole too. I do not have authority to offer that, Richard said. Then get it, Patricia said. She stood up and I followed her lead. We will give you 72 hours to bring us a comprehensive settlement proposal that addresses all the affected homeowners. Otherwise, we are going to the district attorney and to the media. I am sure the Atlanta news stations would love a story about a HOA president running a waterfront property scam. We left Richard and Brenda scrambling. In the parking lot, Patricia grinned at me. That went well, did it? Oh yes, they are terrified. Richard knows this is a disaster, and Brenda is realizing she could face criminal charges. They will settle. But 3 days later, instead of a settlement offer, I received a cease and desist letter from Richard's office. It claimed that I was harassing HOA board members and making defamatory statements. It demanded that I stop spreading false information about the HOA and threatened legal action if I did not comply. I forwarded the letter to Patricia. She called me 30 minutes later, laughing. They are panicking, she said. This is a desperation move. They know they cannot win in court, so they are trying to intimidate you into silence. What do? We file suit. We have enough for a solid case, and once we are in litigation, we can subpoena all their records. I want to see exactly where that $150,000 in lake fees went. And I want to see the rental agreements for those docks. Patricia filed our lawsuit the following week in the Superior Court of Pickens County, where Pinecrest is located. We sued the HOA and Brenda Hutchinson personally for fraud, breach of fiduciary duty, and conversion. We also sent letters to the 7 homeowners who had been forced to sell their docks, explaining the situation and offering to help them recover their property. The response was overwhelming. 6 of the 7 homeowners immediately contacted Patricia, wanting to join the lawsuit. The 7th, an elderly woman named Dorothy, had moved out of state, but her daughter called to say they were interested in pursuing a claim. Within 2 weeks, we had a class action lawsuit with 8 plaintiffs against the Pinecrest Hills HOA. And that was when things got really interesting. As part of the discovery process, Patricia subpoenaed all the HOA's financial records. What she found was staggering. The Lake Maintenance Fund was not just collecting money from homeowners. Brenda had also secured a $15,000 grant from the county for lake conservation, claiming that Lake Whitmore was a community resource that needed protection. That money had gone into the same fund as the homeowner assessments and the dock rental revenue, but the spending did not match the stated purpose. Very little of the money had actually gone to lake maintenance. Instead, there were vague expenses labeled as administrative costs, consulting fees, and contractor payments. When Patricia dug deeper, she discovered that many of these payments had gone to companies owned by Brenda's husband or brother-in-law. This is embezzlement, Patricia told me during a meeting in her office. Brenda has been using the HOA as a personal piggy bank. I have found over $90,000 in questionable payments. Should we be talking to the police? Already done. I contacted the Pickens County Sheriff's Office this morning and gave them everything I have. They are opening an investigation. 2 days later, I was working in my garage when a sheriff's deputy pulled up my driveway. My heart jumped, but he was just there to ask me some questions about the HOA and the timeline of events. I told him everything I knew and provided copies of all my documents. He thanked me and left. That evening, Tom Richardson came over looking excited. "Did you hear? The sheriff showed up at Brenda's house this afternoon with a warrant, took out boxes of files and her computer." "How do you know that?" "Everyone knows. Half the neighborhood was watching. Brenda was screaming about persecution and illegal searches. Her husband had to physically restrain her from attacking one of the deputies. I called Patricia to confirm. She had heard the same thing from the prosecutor's office. "They are moving fast," she said. "That usually means they have solid evidence. I would not be surprised if Brenda is arrested within the week." She was right. 5 days later, Brenda Hutchinson was arrested and charged with multiple counts of theft by deception, embezzlement, and fraud. The sheriff's investigation had uncovered even more than Patricia had found, including evidence that Brenda had been skimming money from other HOA funds, not just the lake maintenance account. In total, she had stolen over $130,000 from the community. The HOA board held an emergency meeting and immediately removed Brenda as president. They also voted to suspend all dock regulations and stop all rental operations. Richard Pemberton resigned as the HOA's attorney, and they brought in new counsel to deal with the fallout. The new HOA attorney, a woman named Susan Reynolds, reached out to Patricia within days of being hired. Susan was professional and blunt. "My clients made serious mistakes," she told us in a settlement conference. "They allowed one person to have too much control and did not exercise proper oversight. They want to make this right. Here is what we are proposing." The settlement offer was comprehensive. The HOA would return all 7 docks to their original owners and compensate them for fair market value of the use they had lost. They would refund all lake maintenance fees that had been collected and pay each affected homeowner an additional $10,000 for damages. The total settlement was over $200,000. "Where are they getting that kind of money?" I asked. "Insurance," Susan said. "The HOA has a director's and officer's liability policy that covers this type of situation. The insurance company is not happy, but they are paying." We accepted the settlement on behalf of all 8 plaintiffs. The HOA also agreed to amend their master plan, to explicitly acknowledge that individual dock owners had full control over their private property, and that the HOA had no regulatory authority over Lake Whitmore, except for general community aesthetic standards that applied to all structures. But I was not done. I still had one more card to play. At the next HOA board meeting, which was open to all homeowners, I stood up during the public comment period. The community center was packed. Everyone wanted to see what would happen after Brenda's arrest and the settlement. "I want to address something that has not been fully resolved," I said. "During this whole mess, I learned some interesting things about property rights and water law. Specifically, I learned that my property includes the original Morrison Creek that feeds Lake Whitmore. I own the water rights to that creek, which means I have the legal authority to control the lake's water source." There was a murmur through the crowd. The new HOA president, a reasonable man named Gary Mitchell, looked confused. "I am not raising this to threaten anyone," I continued. "But I think it highlights a bigger issue. This community has operated for decades without anyone really understanding who owns what. The HOA assumed it had authority over the lake. Brenda took advantage of that confusion to steal from all of us. I do not want this to happen again." "What are you proposing?" Gary asked. "I am proposing that we create a separate Lake Whitmore association made up of the waterfront property owners. This association would have clear legal authority over the lake, funded by proportional contributions from the members. We would manage water quality, aquatic vegetation, and common areas, but individual docks would remain private property. "And what about your water rights?" someone called out from the crowd. "I am willing to donate an easement to the Lake Association, guaranteeing that Morrison Creek will continue to feed the lake in perpetuity. In exchange, the association agrees to maintain the creek's natural flow and protect the spring system from contamination." Gary looked at Susan Reynolds, who nodded. "That sounds reasonable. We would need to work out the details, but I think it could address a lot of the problems we have had. Over the next several months, we did exactly that." The waterfront property owners formed the Lake Whitmore Association, with clear bylaws and limited authority. I worked with a water rights attorney to draft an easement that protected the creek while ensuring my property rights were recognized. The county environmental office got involved to help us create a watershed protection plan. It was not quick or easy, but by the end of that summer, Lake Whitmore had a proper management structure that respected individual property rights while protecting the lake as a shared resource. As for Brenda Hutchinson, her criminal case dragged through the courts for over a year. She initially pleaded not guilty, claiming that everything she had done was authorized by the board and that she was being scapegoated. But the evidence was overwhelming. Financial records showed clear patterns of self-dealing and embezzlement. Emails revealed that she had deliberately created the dock regulations to generate revenue, knowing they were legally questionable. In the end, Brenda accepted a plea deal. She pleaded guilty to multiple counts of theft and fraud in exchange for a reduced sentence. The judge sentenced her to 5 years in prison, with 2 years to be served and the rest on probation. She was also ordered to pay full restitution, over $130,000, though most of that was covered by the HOA's insurance settlement. Her husband divorced her before she went to prison. Her family moved away from Pinecrest Hills, and as far as I know, no one from the community ever heard from them again. The other HOA board members who had served during Brenda's tenure were not charged criminally, but several resigned under pressure from the community. Gary Mitchell and a slate of new board members were elected in a special election, and they immediately implemented new oversight procedures to prevent future abuses. For my part, I got to keep my dock exactly as it was. I also became the first president of the Lake Whitmore Association, a position I held for 2 years before handing it off to someone else. The association functions well, managing the lake with input from all the waterfront owners, and the water quality has actually improved under the new management structure. My dock remains my favorite place on the property. I still sit out there most evenings with a beer and a fishing rod, watching the sun set over Lake Whitmore. But now I appreciate it even more, knowing what I went through to protect it. The whole experience taught me some valuable lessons about standing up to bullies, even when they have official titles and the appearance of authority. It taught me the importance of understanding property rights, and not just assuming that organizations like HOAs have the power they claim. And it taught me that sometimes the best defense is a good offense. If I had just accepted Brenda's ultimatum, I would have lost my dock, and she would have continued stealing from the community. Instead, by pushing back and doing my homework, I uncovered a criminal enterprise and helped protect my neighbors from further victimization. I also discovered that I owned one of the most important pieces of property in the entire community, the water source that made our lake possible. Tom Richardson jokes that I should have charged the HOA a water access fee, like Brenda tried to charge me dock fees. But I am not interested in that kind of revenge. I just wanted to protect what was mine and make sure the community was run fairly and legally. The The story spread beyond Pinecrest Hills. Patricia wrote an article about it for a property law journal, using it as a case study in HOA overreach and the importance of clear property boundaries. A reporter from the Atlanta newspaper did a feature story about the case, focusing on how HOAs can spiral out of control without proper oversight. I even got a call from a television producer who wanted to turn it into a show, but I declined. I had my 15 minutes of fame, and that was enough. These days, Pinecrest Hills is a much different community. The HOA still exists, but with clearly defined and limited powers. They handle common area maintenance, organize community events, and enforce reasonable rules about things like lawn care and exterior paint colors. But they stay far away from anything involving individual property rights or the lake. The Lake Whitmore Association has 11 members, one for each waterfront property. We meet quarterly to discuss water quality issues, coordinate on things like aquatic weed control, and plan occasional community events like the 4th of July boat parade. It is exactly what a community organization should be. A group of neighbors working together on shared interests, not a bureaucratic power structure. My property values actually increased after all this settled down. Turns out that having clear, undisputed property rights and control over your own dock is attractive to potential buyers. Not that I am selling. I plan to stay in this house for the long haul. I have put down roots here, made good friends, and created a life I am happy with. The creek that runs through my property, Morrison Creek, remains undisturbed. I had an environmental consultant come out to assess the spring system, and he confirmed that it is a remarkably clean and stable water source. The springs emerge from deep underground, filtered through layers of limestone and granite, and maintain a constant temperature year-round. As long as the land around them is protected from development and contamination, they should continue flowing indefinitely. I donated a conservation easement over the creek and spring areas to the Georgia Land Trust, ensuring they will never be developed or altered. This gives me significant tax benefits and guarantees that future owners of my property cannot destroy the water source. The easement also allows the Lake Whitmore Association to monitor the springs and take action if they are ever threatened. Sometimes I walk down to where the creek emerges from underground, just before it flows into the lake. It is a beautiful spot, surrounded by ferns and moss-covered rocks, with crystal-clear water bubbling up from the earth. It is amazing to think that this small spring feeds an entire 300-acre lake. Nature has a way of surprising you with its resilience and interconnectedness. The whole experience with the HOA also made me more involved in local government. I started attending county commission meetings and got to know the planning and zoning staff. I learned that a lot of the problems we had in Pinecrest Hills stemmed from outdated subdivision regulations that did not clearly define the relationship between HOAs and property owners. I worked with a county commissioner to draft new regulations that require HOAs to register their governing documents with the county and provide clear disclosures to home buyers about what authority the HOA actually has. Those regulations were adopted last year and are now being used as a model by other counties in Georgia. It is a small thing, but it might prevent other people from going through what I went through. I also joined the board of directors for the Georgia Property Owners Alliance, a nonprofit that helps homeowners navigate disputes with HOAs and local governments. We provide free legal information, connect people with attorneys, and advocate for stronger property rights protections at the state level. It is volunteer work, but it is deeply satisfying to help people who are facing the same kind of bullying and overreach that I experienced. Patricia Chen, and I have become good friends. She has built a thriving practice representing homeowners in HOA disputes, and she credits our case with raising her profile in that area of law. She still jokes that she should send Brenda Hutchinson a thank you card for being such a spectacularly awful HOA president and giving us such a strong case to work with. As for the other homeowners who were part of the class action lawsuit, most of them kept their docks after the settlement. A couple chose to sell them legitimately to neighbors, receiving fair market value this time. The docks that had been rented out by the HOA were returned to their original owners, who were also compensated for the rental income they should have received. Dorothy, the elderly woman who had moved out of state, decided to sell her property to a young family from Atlanta. They love the lake and have become active members of the Lake Whitmore Association. Their kids can usually be found fishing off Dorothy's old dock in the summer, and it is nice to see the property being enjoyed again. The community as a whole has healed from the Brenda Hutchinson debacle. There was a period of suspicion and division right after everything came out, with some people defending Brenda and claiming she was being persecuted. But as more facts emerged and the extent of her theft became clear, even her defenders had to admit she had crossed serious lines. The financial recovery was complicated. The HOA's insurance covered most of the settlement and restitution, but the premiums skyrocketed afterward. The board had to implement a special assessment to cover the increased costs, which made people angry. But Gary Mitchell and the new board were transparent about why it was necessary, and most homeowners understood that they were paying for Brenda's crimes, not for the current leadership's mistakes. Brenda's restitution payments have been inconsistent. She is supposed to pay a certain amount each month once she is released from prison, but her employment prospects are limited given her criminal record. The HOA has accepted that they probably will never recover the full amount from her personally, though they continue to pursue collection efforts. The county's investigation into the lake conservation grant led to some changes in how those grants are awarded and monitored. Brenda had submitted fraudulent reports about how the money was being used, claiming it went to water quality testing and habitat restoration, when it actually went to her relatives' companies for non-existent services. The county now requires much more detailed documentation and conducts site visits to verify that grant-funded work is actually happening. I think about that first letter from Brenda fairly often, the one that started this whole chain of events. If I had just ignored it or accepted her ultimatum, my life would be simpler in some ways. But I would have lost something important, and a criminal would have continued preying on my neighbors. I am glad I fought back, even though it was stressful and time-consuming. The experience also taught me not to be intimidated by official-sounding demands or legal threats. So many people give up when they receive a letter from an HOA or a lawyer, assuming that the other side must know what they are talking about. But authority figures can be wrong, and they can abuse their positions. It is worth questioning them and doing your own research, even if it is uncomfortable. My engineering background definitely helped with this. I am used to analyzing systems, identifying problems, and finding solutions. When Brenda tried to bully me, my instinct was to gather data and understand the technical and legal details. That analytical approach served me well, and it is something I encourage other people to adopt when facing similar situations. The lawsuit and settlement also provided a financial windfall that I did not expect. The $10,000 I received, plus the refunded lake maintenance fees, was a nice addition to my retirement savings. But more valuable than the money was the peace of mind that came from knowing my property rights were secure and clearly documented. I used some of the settlement money to make improvements to the dock, not because I had to, but because I wanted to. I added better lighting for night fishing, installed a small storage locker for life jackets and fishing gear, and built a covered seating area at the end. The dock is now even more functional and enjoyable than it was before, and I take pride in maintaining it. The lake itself is healthier than it has been in years. The Lake Whitmore Association hired a professional lake management company to assess the water quality and make recommendations. We implemented a program to control invasive aquatic plants, installed nesting boxes for wood ducks and other waterfowl, and created a fishery management plan. The base fishing has improved dramatically, and we are seeing species of birds and turtles that had not been around for years. All of this happened because I refused to be pushed around by an HOA president on a power trip. It is strange to think that standing up for my dock rights led to creating a whole new community organization, uncovering a criminal enterprise, and improving environmental management of a 300-acre lake. But that is how these things work sometimes. One person's decision to fight back can create ripples that change an entire community. I still get calls occasionally from people in other HOA communities who are facing similar problems. Word has gotten around about what happened in Pinecrest Hills, and people want advice on how to handle their own disputes. I always tell them the same thing: document everything, know your rights, and do not be afraid to get a good lawyer. Most HOA disputes can be resolved through negotiation, once you show that you understand the law and are willing to stand up for yourself. Some of those people have become friends. There is a network of property rights advocates in Georgia now, people who have fought their own battles against overreaching HOAs or local governments. We share information, support each other's efforts, and work together on legislative initiatives. It is a community built on shared experience and a commitment to protecting individual rights. My relationship with the current HOA board is professional and respectful. Gary Mitchell and I serve together on a joint committee that coordinates between the HOA and the Lake Whitmore Association on matters that affect both organizations. We meet monthly to discuss issues like storm water management, road maintenance near the lake, and community events. It is a good working relationship, and I appreciate that the new board is focused on serving the community rather than controlling it. The legal reforms that came out of this case have had broader implications. Several other HOAs in Pickens County reviewed their own rules and made changes after seeing what happened to Brenda and the Pinecrest Hills board. Some discovered their own governance problems and corrected them before they became serious. Others simply became more careful about exercising their authority and respecting property rights. The Georgia legislature considered a bill last year that would have created stronger oversight of HOAs and given homeowners more rights to challenge HOA decisions. The bill did not pass, but it generated a lot of discussion and awareness about HOA abuses. I testified before a legislative committee about my experience, and several lawmakers told me they were committed to addressing these issues in future sessions. Looking back on everything that happened, I am struck by how many things had to go right for this to work out the way it did. I had to be willing to fight back. I had to find an excellent attorney in Patricia Chen. The property records had to be preserved and accessible. The sheriff's office had to take the case seriously. The HOA insurance had to cover the settlement. Any one of those things could have gone differently, and I might have ended up losing my dock or facing years of expensive litigation. But I also think there was an element of justice at work. Brenda Hutchinson was so blatant in her abuse of power, so confident that she could not be challenged, that she made mistakes. She kept poor records. She involved her family members in obvious conflicts of interest, and she pushed too hard against too many people. Eventually, someone was going to push back, and it happened to be me. The fact that my property turned out to include the water rights to the lake source was pure luck, but it was also a reminder that property law is complex and full of surprises. Most people never look at their historical deed records or think about issues like water rights and easements. But those details matter, and they can completely change the dynamics of a dispute. I have become something of a local expert on property rights and water law, not because I set out to study those topics, but because I had to learn them to protect my own interests. I have given talks at community centers and libraries about understanding property deeds and standing up to HOA overreach. People are hungry for this information, and I am happy to share what I learned. The Morrison family, who originally owned most of the land around Lake Whitmore, would probably be amazed to see how their property has evolved. They created the lake in the 1950s by damming their creek, sold off parcels while retaining water rights, and built a thriving community. I like to think they would approve of how things turned out, with the lake being managed cooperatively by the people who live around it, rather than being controlled by a distant authority or abused by a corrupt official. My life has settled into a comfortable rhythm now. I spend my days working on projects around the house, fishing from my dock, and volunteering with various property rights organizations. I have a good circle of friends in Pinecrest Hills and beyond. The stress of the legal battle is behind me, replaced by the satisfaction of knowing I did the right thing and helped create positive change. Sometimes, when I am sitting on my dock at sunset with a beer in hand, watching the light play across Lake Whitmore, I think about that letter from Brenda Hutchinson. It was meant to intimidate me and force me into surrendering my property. Instead, it set off a chain of events that exposed corruption, reformed community governance, and strengthened property rights for everyone in Pinecrest Hills. That letter was the worst thing that could have happened to Brenda Hutchinson, though she did not know it at the time. If she had just left me alone, she might have continued her scheme for years. But she got greedy and picked the wrong target. I had the resources, the knowledge, and the determination to fight back, and once I started pulling on that thread, the whole thing unraveled. Justice is not always swift, and it is not always certain. But in this case, it worked. A corrupt official went to prison, victims were compensated, and systems were reformed to prevent future abuses. My dock is still standing, looking out over a lake that I now understand I have a special connection to, not just as a property owner but as the steward of its water source. I own the lake that feeds their water system. Not in a controlling or exploitative way, but in a way that comes with responsibility and respect for the natural resource and the community that depends on it. That is a burden I am happy to carry, and a story I will never get tired of telling.